Can we start, everybody? We'll kind of eat on the way. If you're still eating, that's fine. Are we on? All right, let's call to order.
Director Asner?
Here.
Director Byers?
Here.
Director Faulkner?
Here.
Director Hudson? Here. Director Muller?
Here.
Vice President Petroff? Here. President Cuneo?
Here. Let's have our pledge of allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you for everybody coming today. All righty. First, we've already had a roll call, establishment of quorum. Strategic instructional delivery. Thank you.
All right, so we have 4 presentations for tonight. So the first one is going to be the instructional delivery plan for SSD schools, programs and technical high schools for the fall. This is going to be providing a recommendation of what we're going to start for our programming for next year. We have Dr. Kelly Rixby and Kevin Andrews, who will be presenting tonight.
Good evening, President Cuneo, Vice President Patra, Board of Directors, and Dr. Keenan. My name is Kelly Grigsby. I'm the Executive Director for Schools and Programs. Thanks for having me tonight. Tonight, Mr. Andrews and I are going to talk about our recommendations for reopening schools in the fall. Next slide. Currently, we are offering in our special ed schools and programs a family choice, which is 5 days a week in person or 5 days a week of virtual instruction for families. At our technical schools, we're offering 5 days a week in person for most programs. We have offered a family choice for select programs, for example, our exploratory programs that are conducive to virtual instruction. Next slide. We'll go to the next slide. All right, so this plan that I'm discussing tonight applies to August of 2021. It covers our SSD schools and programs, which includes bridges and also our vocational skills programs and core programs. I'm proposing that all students return to school 100% in person without a family choice option, so no virtual option. We recognize that we have students in our schools that are medically fragile or may be immune compromised. In that case, we would use our medical homebound process that's already been established to provide virtual instruction. If we have families that prefer virtual instruction and kids are doing well with virtual instruction, then we would work on a case-by-case basis with the partner districts to see what they're offering, to see if we could support students in those programs in their home schools. Next slide.
All right, good evening, President Cuneo, Vice President Patra, Dr. Keenan, Board of Directors. Kevin Andrews, Executive Director of Career and Technical Education and College and Career Readiness. I'm going to talk a little bit about the plan that we have for the technical high schools, so North Tech and South Tech. So what we're proposing for the 2021-2022 school year is beginning August of 2021. Our junior and senior programs would be 5 days a week in person with no virtual option. As we talked about coming into this semester, we only were offering a virtual option for our sophomore exploration program and those seniors who needed a pathway to graduation. So this is continuing what we began in January. For programs like auto tech and welding, cosmetology, there's just not a good way to do that virtually. For students to get the hands-on experience necessary for certification, they need to be physically present in the classroom. Then for our sophomore exploration program, what we're proposing is 5 days a week in person or a limited virtual option, which I'm going to talk a little bit more here in a moment. I'm going to go to the next slide. So this is a grade distribution breakdown for our sophomore exploration program at North Tech, where currently we have 96 of our sophomores are in person and 63 of our sophomores are virtual. And so as you can see in this chart, our virtual students are really struggling, a good chunk of them. So a third of our virtual sophomore classes are currently failing. When you break this down at an individual student level, 44% of our virtual sophomores are failing at least one class. When you look at the engagement for those students, it's not that these are students who are on the bubble that have a 55 or a 50 or a 48. These are students who have an 8% or a 0%, where they've elected to not engage in learning at all. Despite our best efforts to engage those students in learning, they are not logging in and not participating. And so our staff have made numerous efforts to get them engaged, and at this point, it'd be very hard to get those students to move those grades from failing to passing because how far they are off course. We've been monitoring this data throughout the semester. We were hoping that as we got to third quarter progress reports, that would set in and students would re-engage, and it did not have that impact. So this is the data that's really driving the proposal that we have for our sophomore program. So you want to go to the next slide? Yep. So what we are choosing to do with our sophomores on that limited virtual option is a student must be virtual at their sending high school to be able to access this option. Otherwise, if a student is in person, it creates a logistical challenge for their partner district where they have to figure out somewhere to house the student in the partner district for the day. So we'd only open this to students who are also virtual in a virtual program at their home high school. All instruction is going to be live, synchronous instruction. It's going to follow our normal bell schedule. So those students, the expectation is that they log in at the start of class and they log out at the end of the class. They're logged in the entire time. And then we're going to track attendance the same way we would for an in-person student. So every day, they're logging those absences. And every day, if a student is not present, then communication is going back to the family that day to let them know that their child did not participate in class that day. With that, we would then follow our same policies on attendance. So if attendance issues and engagement issues persist, where the student is just not engaging, like what we saw in that previous graph, instead of just letting them continue, we would then at that point give the student an option where either they can switch to in-person instruction, where they can come back and work with us in person, or they would have the option to return back to their home high school. The big challenge that we have with the technical high schools is the students come to us oftentimes for one class, but that one class is 1.5 credits. So if you fail 1.5 credits, that's a deep hole for a high school student to dig out of. And we want to make sure that students come to us remain on a pathway to graduation. So we're really proposing this to be in the best interest of the student. Next slide. So with that, any questions?
What feedback did you get from the partner districts on this?
Yep, so we have a partner district advisory for career and technical education. We meet 3 times a year. And in our April meeting, this was one of the pieces of the agenda where we were asking them kind of twofold. One, what is their plan for next year? And then how does our plan fit with their plan? The general feedback was they acknowledged those logistical challenges that we've experienced. And so they agreed with the preference of if we have a virtual option, it really should be scoped just to virtual students. And our partner districts, many of them are planning to offer some type of a virtual option next year. And they recognize that if a student wants to do what we offer as far as programming, they're going to need to be in person. So that was an understanding. There's just not a way to do year-long virtual auto tech.
That makes sense. Thank you.
I have another question. Over the last year, we've been hearing about differences in enrollment and choices for virtual versus in-person learning, differences between South Tech and North Tech. So I was hoping you could speak to that and maybe get a sense of how you think will the 2 schools be affected differently? Will the students there be affected differently?
Yeah, so our enrollment numbers, there will be a difference in trend. Because one thing, keep in mind, South Tech has had, many of their schools have been back in person since as early as October. By January, almost all of the schools that feed into South Tech were back in person. So that meant that those students were in person and we were able to communicate with them more easily about the opportunities that we have available. In the North region, we had districts that didn't come back until the end of April. And so our numbers are down from those districts that remained virtual through past spring break. And so Hazelwood numbers are down a little bit, Ferguson Florissant numbers are down a little bit, and a lot of that really is attributed to just our ability to access those students and communicate with them. Our best recruitment, despite our best efforts with direct mail and email, it's that in-person, face-to-face recruitment that really draws students to our programs, and so not having that element did hurt our numbers a little bit. We have many of our programs at North Tech are still full and have a wait list. But just in general, we're down a little bit. We've seen an uptick since Hazelwood and Ferguson Florissant returned to some level of in-person instruction. So I'm hoping that we'll see that trend continue over the next month. But we know once we hit about mid-June, our numbers kind of freeze at that point, and we don't see a lot of new applications at that point. So I think North numbers look like they'll be down a little bit, but in general, they'll be close to what we've seen in years past. South Tech numbers are pretty similar to what you'd see in a traditional year. The only difference is our wait lists are not as deep as they've been in previous years.
And then I have another question. When we talked about the choice to go back to learning in person back in January, there were certain programs that were felt to be able to continue with the virtual only option. But you didn't really address that with this presentation, so I'm curious if you could speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
The data you gave us was about sophomores,
Right.
But obviously this would apply to juniors.
And I use the sophomore data just because those were two good-sized cohorts, where the other group is a lot smaller. But spend some time talking with those teachers who are doing both in-person and virtual. It's been a struggle to manage those two groups simultaneously. For example, web and computer programming. In the morning, we've got 8 students in person and we've got 9 students virtual. And it's really hard for that teacher to continue to support those 9 virtual students. At the same time, they've got 8 in-person students in front of them that are needing their support. Teacher gave the example of, I'm working my way around the room and I'm supporting each individual student, and I've got virtual students who are raising their hand and I just don't see it because I'm dealing with the problems directly in front of me. So we had situations where students felt like they weren't getting the support that they need, and it's just because the students who are there physically, it's more easy to recognize that need than the students who then are virtual on the computer screen behind you. So that was a logistical challenge. What our teacher said was it's basically, it'd be okay to be virtual part of the time, but I'd still need them in person a couple days a week. And so that's really what we're looking at as we look long-term of how do we become more flexible and adaptable in the technical high schools. We might be looking at some different attendance patterns, but even in those programs, they still needed some in-person time. And so the grade distribution piece there and the student engagement piece, it was similar. It was not as stark as what you saw in the sophomore exploration program, but in general, the grades were lower for those virtual students.
In attempting to make up some of those numbers, when school starts, is there an interaction that we stimulate at the schools that then gives students, whether we have like an assembly that then allows students who are interested in taking the kinds of vocational classes? Do we have those sessions at those schools?
So we do. So under normal circumstances, we would do those in person in auditoriums or those types of spaces. Or the other thing that we'll do, it might be that we'll go speak to every freshman English class. So that way we hit all incoming freshmen in a building. It might be more work for us, where it might be 12 presentations to hit every freshman English class, but then that way we know, because every freshman has to take English, that we'll be able to see all those students and expose them to the opportunity. So what it looks like varies a little bit from building to building. We try to do a lot of that virtually this year, where we were doing Zoom presentations to large group. The engagement of that is different. It's not the same. And it's also, our participation rate is not the same as, I know I saw every freshman because I went to every English class. We could be going to every English class virtually, but only half their kids are logging in. So we're just not getting the same reach. And so that's really been our challenge, is reaching those students reliably in every building. And so North Tech, we've already looked at in a couple programs. We're going to have spots open in January, so that way if a student was off the radar now but then re-engages come August. In some programs, we'll have space available in January. We'll begin recruiting for those spots first. At the same time, we'll be recruiting for August of next school year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is universal support, summer support, extended school year.
Yes, we have our Chief Academic Officer, Wendy Pendergrass, updating the board on our ESY programming, introduction school year programming for our special education students, and also universal summer support.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Keenan, President Cuneo, Vice President Potroff, and Board of Directors. I am Wendy Pendergrass, the Chief Academic Officer. Thank you for having me this evening. I will update you on extended school year and universal summer support. So I thought I'd start off with an overview of what extended school year is, which we use the acronyms of ESY. Students are eligible for ESY through the IEP. What ESY's purpose is an extension of their educational program, so beyond what we do during the August to May school year. It extends the year over the summer, and it's truly intended to prevent serious regression and help them recoup some of those skills that they would lose during large breaks of time. Next slide. How a child would qualify for extended school year would be the nature of its disability. For one, it's an IEP team decision. So every IEP meeting, the team should be sitting down and discussing progress towards goals, present levels, different options that a student would have to consider, a team should consider when a team is looking at what is happening throughout the year. So if they're noticing during breaks of time like spring break or winter break that there is some type of regression or skill loss, that's something that the team should be looking at. We also look at the severity of the disability, the learning that is crucial for self-sufficiency and independence, the child's progress again on both behavior goals, learning goals, and physical needs. Those skills and the ability to practice those skills outside the classroom, outside a formal classroom. The availability of resources that would be in the home, the child's curriculum that needs continuous attention. We also look at the vocational needs. So do we need to extend what those students that don't qualify for SWEP, how can we help support them with vocational needs? And the ability of the child's parents to provide that educational structure that is at home. And the final thing is the opportunity for the child to interact with non-disabled peers. So what can ESY services look like? First, an IEP team, for extended school year services, we do not have to meet minute per minute. The entire IEP is not implemented during the extended school year. That is a conversation that the IEP team has during the meeting, and they look at the minutes and what it would take to help support that student during summer. For those students that are determined eligible, we must document goals and how those goals will be addressed during the summer session, the type and amount of special education or related services needed in order for that child to progress, the frequency of the services, the duration of the services, and the location of the services. And as you see on the next slide, there is a variety of services that variety of locations that we provide extended school year. So the graph shows students that are eligible, students, so that means that when we run our reports that the IEP actually says that that student is eligible for extended school year. Enrolled means the parents have sent back the letter stating that their children will participate in extended school year, so that's enrolled. And then off to the side is something that Mary Ann Cooper and Mary Ann Cooper is a phenomenal retired administrator, and she's a whiz at supporting us with extended school year. And she helps our directors and our district out with the hiring process for ESY. So she shares this graph with me often, so we know locations, where we need more staff, where we may be missing staff, nurses, stuff like that. The column that says staff means that they are currently staffed. Next slide. When you see the parentheses next to it, and this graph unfortunately changes daily as we're hiring, but that means typically possible employees that we would need to help support. So we often struggle to find teachers, related service providers, and nurses. That's an area that we struggle to continue to provide support. Next slide. So what would be an ESY teacher's responsibility? Of course, we're really looking at collecting data on those goals, implementing those goals and interventions to support those goals so a child does not regress. Related services collect data either weekly or daily, depending on what the IEP calls for. Ensures universal and quality indicators for all programming are in place, so we're following those daily rules and social interaction. And then, of course, we record students' attendance daily using our system. So it's typically like an everyday school, but just on a shortened level. For an administrator will also make sure that all of our goals are assessed because we give that data to the IEP team at the start of the year. So what's collected over summer. Complete progress reports for extended school year, and of course, share those progress reports with parents. make sure all of our site supervisors have those reports or know where those reports are located, collect all the work samples, collection of any type of progress reports, any type of communication that would go home, so the teacher, in case it's not the student's case manager throughout the year, knows exactly what was communicated with our families and the supports that were provided for the student and how they did. Submit all the attendance summaries, complete the evaluations, and submit all materials for checkout to the site supervisor. So that's kind of what staff responsibility looks like with ESY. Next slide. So universal summer support. So way back when, the district realized that what had transpired with students and the closure of the schools, what we wanted to do is create a possibility of a program that would help students that did not qualify for an extended school year. So the thought of universal summer support was created. So we want to make sure that USS is a one-time offering, well, we don't want to make sure, but USS would be a one-time offering for this summer is what we had discussed, and that we would be looking at providing support for students. We wanted to make sure students that also got extended school year could also participate in universal summer supports as well. Next slide. So what's the difference between universal summer supports and extended school year? Universal summer supports will be open to all students in St. Louis County who received special education services while due to the closure. It is not IEP based. We will be using the IEP, behavior plans, support plans, accommodations as a guide for the students that are attending universal summer support, but it is not minutes permitted, and we would not be providing related services. We're going to do educational activities that also support literacy, numeracy, and social emotional learning. The wonderful thing that has happened out of this is that a lot of our partner districts we are teaming with and implementing some of their intervention programs. We're providing those supports in the environment of the general education building as well. Universal summer support is not intended to provide FAPE. It's intended to provide an experience to our students so they continue with their learning, to all students. To where extended school year would be exactly like I had shared. You would have to qualify through the IEP process. It is IEP based, it is service based. It is something that we provide FAPE. It is intended to provide FAPE, and then students are eligible for ESY, to where all students were eligible for USS. Next slide. So student enrollment, and this is changing by the day. Just roughly how many how many students are enrolled. At last count, 1,391 students or families have submitted some type of interest into universal summer support or attending universal summer support. About a month ago, we launched some paperwork and formal to really get hard numbers of families that were serious about sending. Right now, we're about 551 students that have submitted all of the paperwork, emergency contacts, just agreements that we have. We are in the process of calling those families and reaching out to families that have not submitted or to submitting the paperwork just to make sure we have all the appropriate information. Next slide. So what the responsibility that looks like for staff, review and understand any student's plans in order to make sure we're able to support the students. We have a variety, working with Dr. Boiton, a variety of learning applications that we can use. We're using IXL, Everyday Speech, News to You, ULS, providing outlines of lesson plans and activities that will focus on math, English language arts, and social emotional, and even the opportunity with some of those with unique learning systems, science and social studies, so do some activities in other subjects as well, but of course working on that math and reading. Share progress with families by completing a weekly newsletter, kind of a summary that you would receive similar to a camp-like atmosphere, making sure that we're staying in communication with our families, what activities we'll be doing, things that they could talk to their families about, or their students about when they come home. Ensure students are participating in their social emotional behavior in a fun way, so continue those rules and routines. Records student attendance, and we're still figuring out the best way to do that. What the supervisor would do would be very similar to, you know, verifying weekly attendance, make sure staff are doing what they need to do, and students are provided the supports that they need, make sure they're able to approve in WFM, conduct weekly walkthroughs to ensure all the supports are in place for our students, and then, of course, there are some buildings that you'll see on the next slide that are not providing lunch to their students, so we will continue to figure out the best way that special school district will get those students lunch that will be staying for the full day USS. Next slide. I wanted to show you a brief kind of synopsis of what the programs look like in our partner jurisdictions and the locations for universal summer support. Some districts are having opportunities in every single building. Some of the districts have combined, like Kirkwood would have Kaiser, the middle school and the high school. What they do is bring their early childhood students up to the elementary school, so they would have pre-K through 5, and then 6 through 12 would go to the middle school. So kind of give that different experience. Next slide. A nice thing is happening in Rockwood, Valley Park, just because of the nature of how small Valley Park is. The families that are interested in sending their students to Universal Summer Support, we are partnering with Rockwood, and those students are attending actually classrooms in the Rockwood programs. So it's nice that we'll do some partnering in that way. Next slide. So next steps, we are vigorously hiring support. You will hire a bunch of staff to help support USS, and we continue to hire. We also, in Universal Summer Supports, are having problems finding staff that want to work a full-day program. We are looking at doing nursing a little bit different for those students that require a one-on-one nurse. Of course, we are providing that. But for students that would benefit from a nurse being nearby or available, we're going to look at possibly contracting nurse services to have floating nurses. So they may float between Riverview and Jennings, they may float between Rockwood in the morning or Valley Park in the morning and Rockwood in the afternoon, or items like that. Complete all the video trainings, work to figure out lunch. Myself and Dr. Hogg have a meeting tomorrow to see what that's going to look like, how we're going to logistically deliver the lunches and make sure the directors have been working with the partner districts to have places to store the lunch. And we want to make sure that we have those students staying all day. We want to make sure that they have lunch. And then, of course, order supply boxes. So to do a little different, because the variety of activities we have, we're going to order supply boxes to our directors in each building. So construction paper, colored pencils, anything that they would need in order to do any type of the activities. We're going to do a little support box, and we're going to send it to all the directors that then they can disseminate in the classrooms that they need to. Any questions?
I got it. Go right ahead.
All right, I was just wondering, compare, if you don't have the data on hand, but compared to past years where there wasn't COVID, how do our ESY numbers look, like percentage of kids who are eligible versus actually attending? Do we have about the same amount of kids as we would any other summer, more kids, less kids?
At the last count compared to 2019, which again was a little bit different because we were virtual, if you remember, we actually would have more students attending ESY because I think the nature of it, now that it's back in person, our numbers are a little. We typically have about a third to two-thirds of our population attend ESY, but if you would like a comparison, I can look at that.
I was just wondering if more people are going on vacation this summer, or are the other ends of the pendulum, more people are like, no, we need more school because this past year we've been
Right.
different. And then it kind of seems, I mean, these are just by numbers, so not by, who's who. Does it seem like just about most of the students who are in ESY are going to stay full day for USS?
Surprisingly, no. There is a lot of students, I was also expecting that, but when you start looking at some of our other grids that would have been too much, where you see if the student had required ESY and going to USS, it's a good mix. It's not as I thought that a lot of our students that would be doing ESY would just stay, and it's not. Yeah, it's a variety, which is good.
I'm sorry, I
Go
have a
right
comment
ahead.
that's relevant to that discussion. I think I address some of those issues, but I think there may be some, well, either misinformation or on the parents' end, and sometimes I'm concerned also on the part of staff when they're describing the USS. I think one of the things that folks get stuck on that I've heard from several parents is that the same types of IEP services and related services are not going to be offered during USS. And for some parents, that's influencing their decision about whether or not they want to enroll, because sometimes I think that they think that the way they describe it is they're told something like, well, we're just not going to be following the IEP goals. And so they say, well, why is it even worth it? And I think, I can see why for some parents they might choose that, but I'm thinking about the child I spoke with last week who has a learning disorder and really just lost ground in reading and writing and math this year. That kid would benefit tremendously from this program, but the parents' comment was just, we're not going to follow the IEP guidelines and use those supports, so I don't want to send them there. And after we talk more about what at least my understanding of what the program should be like, I think they were more interested. So there may be some miscommunications there about
I would agree.
what the program is supposed to be like.
Yes.
Part of it is we've never done it before, so.
Right, it's new, we're working through that, yes, there's been some weird things that I've heard from families that I have no idea where that message would have came from, but I think moving forward, being reflective, there were some things that we could have done differently to make sure the information was clear.
And so I was going to suggest, again, and I mentioned some other comments in private, but I would suggest, if there's a way to just send out some, an email or something clarifying to students.
Okay.
And then the other comment we talked, I think you were already aware of this, but there was an error on the website, the SSD website, about a deadline. Mm-hmm. And so I got that email about USS, but I think for some parents, when they go online to look at the website, it looks like they can no longer apply because the deadline was.
Okay.
So just if you send out a message to the families as well.
I spoke already, and we're taking care of that right now.
Thank you. Yeah, I know you were. And then I had one more comment. Is there any effort to gather data about educational achievements pre and post? Just thinking, comparing it to the group of kids with IEPs who don't do the USS, just to see if there was an impact over the summer.
We were actually having that conversation today. Were you involved? Were you listening in? Because what tools, what could we evaluate? With having a program, it's something that we want to do. We want to make sure that it's fun is not the word, but engaging and enriching and skill building and just in a more relaxed atmosphere that wouldn't be as routine as a school day in and day out. But what do we use to evaluate that? So possibly taking data, seeing with the assessments when our students come back, comparing those to students that, like in the SSD schools, when we do our fall assessments, that they do Star Enterprise, did those students attend USS or ESY, did they maintain? Those were the conversations that we were having. So that's still in the process.
Thank you. I'm glad you guys are thinking about it.
Yeah.
Great idea.
I'll wake up again at 3 o'clock in the morning to figure that one out. Thank you.
I had a couple. Just, if anybody else has anything. Go on.
So I know this is our first summer to do this. I think it sounds amazing. How and what would we look at to decide if we could do it?
Well, there are several things that I would want to look at. I would want to look at attendance. I would want to look at possibly evaluating to see if providing these activities do really maintain the learning throughout the year. There are some things that I think could be improved when it comes to partner districts, what we have learned. What we don't want to do is compete against ADA with our partner districts and have right now we have 23, 24 different USS plans happening. And so that's quite magical to support. So what we would want to do is make sure how can we team with our partner districts? How can we team to possibly consider do this again in a natural way? In our schools, I think it's much more manageable. I think it's much more something that we can control and provide the opportunity for, but yes.
I just think the amount of effort you're putting into it is wonderful. I think for the students it is going to be successful, but I also think all the effort we're putting into it is something we should be able to recreate a lot of effort if we're not able to work from our success moving forward. And so it'd be great in the fall, after we get through the summer, to come back to the board and talk about what did and didn't work.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
I pick up on what Meredith said. That's one of my questions. I wanted to make sure that we don't even really need a pre and post. We have the evaluation at the end of the year. We have the evaluation at the beginning of the year. If we could just look at are the gains, we could look at the scores of whether there were gains or losses. We wouldn't have to do any additional assessments. All we'd have to do is look at that and compare one group to the other group. And we wouldn't even have to look at individuals, because we could be talking groups. So I don't see any problems with confidentiality and manipulating or doing whatever we do with the data. But I think what I wanted to do with that is I really like this idea. And I would like something that shows me that if we do it again, we can justify, first of all, the expenses, because it is going to be expensive. But we can justify the expense, and we can show that it worked well. And then if it worked well, what we can talk about is what we could put out in the following year, if we would do it again, about the gains the kids made, or the fact that there was not that kind of a regression. So I think that would be extremely important. I had some other questions on your numbers. And I'll give you a reason why I want the numbers, okay? Or why it would be nice to have the numbers. Could I have a breakdown by size of the districts of the students that are eligible for ESY? And I'd like to be able to shoot that off to Dr. Macklin so he could look at it as it relates to equity. You have the numbers here of the eligibles and those who are enrolled. It would be nice to also look at the size of the district, by number of our students in that district, come up with a percentile to find out, is this an equity thing? Are these roughly the same across? Is something standing out? And if there is something standing out, maybe we should be doing something about it. Which gives me another set of numbers that I wanted to look at, looking at this. It's kind of open. I looked at just as we were here, I just jotted, I wasn't doing percentiles. All I did was above 50% or below 50% for eligible. I found out the ones that were below 50%, Bayless, Hazelwood, Jennings, Ladue, they were the ones who were under 50%. I was just curious why. Why were they individuals that were eligible and less than 50% of those eligible accepted? And I was just curious, is there a reason for that?
What it's through the IEP team, so maybe
Yeah,
what we could.
I looked at the ones that were eligible and the ones that were enrolled.
Right.
And so when I looked at the ones that were enrolled, I had 5 districts that were well below 50%. And I was
Students
trying to
actually
figure out
attending.
why did those districts not choose to do this? Why did not those students choose?
And I don't know if we've asked those questions to our families. Some of it, I can say, these numbers change daily, hourly. The closer it gets to extended school year time, parents then often make the decision. Sometimes when we send out the information, it may be too early and parents haven't solidified what they're going to do over the summer. I can speak for Hazelwood. I'm wondering if Hazelwood is looking a little different this year, because Hazelwood is really running a full schedule program starting in June and ending, some of the schools are ending in August. So I'm wondering if families are also participating in that. But these are questions that we can look into.
Yeah. This may not be the time to look at it, but when this is all over, it would be nice to look at that, to make sure that we are providing services across the county, at least on an equal basis.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be I can say it's not a lack of transportation. We provide transportation for any child that qualifies for extended school year. for the most part, I don't know too many children that would qualify for transportation as a related service and extended school year.
I was just wondering, like, even third floor, had 144 eligible, only 58 went. If you look at Jennings, 102 eligible, to 50. It seems potential for regression. If it's recommended in your IEP, they're saying you're going to regress. That percentage of people. So I would, at the end of this, once we get all the numbers and figures in, it would be nice to do a look through at this to find out why. And it's always, I do best volunteering people to do things. It might be nice to talk to Dr. Macklin later, because
I will work with Dr. Boiton and Dr. Macklin to make sure that we come up with a plan and know the right questions to ask so we can get the movement.
I know we do transportation for ESY, do we also provide it for USS, or?
So we decided that the students that qualify for transportation as a related service, we would continue on for USS. The other students, it is their own responsibility to get to and from. Some of the districts are providing transportation, but it will come back on some of the families.
I'd like to follow up on what, Dr. Julio said about just in establishing eligibility. That process comes from information then that's gathered directly from families or from the parents as it pertains to establishing the number of people that are now said to be eligible, and then the follow-up in reference to that question. As he said, you would think that if there's been criterion that established the eligibility, why would it be, and that criteria has been viewed by the families and the parents, then why would it be such a huge gap in reference to the acceptance? And so that would be how are we gathering that eligibility?
So there is specific criteria that is provided through IDEA to qualify a student for extended school year. So an IEP team has to consider several questions as a team, and the parent is probably one of the most important members of an IEP team, to where we want to make sure that the team itself is looking at all of the indicators and if a child would benefit, or does the team feel that providing extended school year would benefit the child with its progress to maintain those. It's not to increase skills, it's really to maintain and continue on with those skills. So why families don't access, there's probably a variety of reasons, but I can't think of one important thing. They are involved in all the conversations. They understand, they receive letters, they receive communications. There's multiple data points throughout the year that we use to continue when we review the data to make sure that we are making the correct decisions to qualify for a student for extended school year. So I think, as Dr. Cuneo said, that's something that we need to figure out why our families not accessing.
It may be because ESY is only like 8 to 12, work, and then get your kids to and from school, you know, about picking them up. Well, now, but you can ask them like in the past, yeah.
I know I hope you don't mind me following on this as well. I know you mentioned the number of data points that you collect to determine eligibility. Do you collect data on where that decision rests, whether it's decided by the counselors and regards to the IEP, or the data that Heather's talking about, or Tiffany, sorry, Ms. Hudson, is the data being collected on how that decision has been made, on whether this student is not only eligible but enrolled?
I don't know if I understand the question. So the IEP team would sit down and have a discussion, and then if it isn't decided earlier in the year by March or April, the IEP team again agrees that this student would be eligible for extended school year, where letters would go out, IEP goals would be written, services would be provided. The families are a part of that. As far as the follow-up, I don't know if we've ever done any follow-up with our families to ask them, why are you not accessing ESY?
Okay, I mean, I'd be very curious about that, if that could be done, some follow-up on determining why. Thank you.
Absolutely.
With the exception of Ladue, every other one that is below 50, that would be below 50%, when we look at the numbers for autism, those were the same districts that had the extremely low number of children with autism. First of all, hardly had any people who were diagnosed as autism. Same thing happened with Hazel. Maybe there's some central factor in all of this.
Sorry, so the comment was just a second, the school districts where I think we're maybe under-identifying them as opposed to school districts where
That are not
lower enrollment and
that are eligible.
but take a look at our sometimes they're less than 50% of those schools. I think that you hit the nail on the head. It's the daycare issue with it. That is, it's not the transportation issue. It's the lack of daycare during work hours. Oftentimes you just have to make accommodations. You have to have plans.
Is there a way,
Where you can do during the day.
is there a way on transportation to drop children off at the daycare?
I'll just say, because the level of need is hard to find a facility that can accommodate him. My experience is summers are just me at home with him, because it's hard to coordinate.
Thank you. Very much for your feedback. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, our next presentation is our comprehensive school improvement plan, which is our CSIP plan, and Dr. Boiton is going to be updating the board on this. This is a very lengthy PowerPoint, so she's going to try to chunk it into sections, and if there's further questions, we can always engage in those after. Good evening, President Cuneo. Board of Directors, my name is Molly Boiton, and I am the Executive Director of Teaching, Learning, and Accountability. And I'm here this evening for my first presentation on the comprehensive school improvement plan update, which will include our third quarter progress on our CSIP plan, as well as our action steps that we've drafted for the upcoming school year, which will be our final year in this CSIP cycle. So, I kind of already said this. The purpose of this report is really to update the status of our CSIP teams for this year. We do have all of our information
on a Teams drive in which all DLT members have access to. We also, every quarter, go through updates as a team and problem solve. Next slide, please. So goal number 1 is our student performance goal. And as you can see, we have 4 strategies under this goal. Our goal champion is Wendy Pendergrass, and this is all about student performance. So I will report out on each one of these. So our first one, I'm actually the champion for, and that's really to support educators in implementing that multi-tiered system of support countywide for literacy, numeracy, and behavior. Here you can see some of our accomplishments, and I'm not going to read every line. I'm assuming you guys have the opportunity to read through. But I'll just highlight a couple of quick things. We have developed key performance indicators for planning professional learning. And then another big piece that we did was we have a data story format that we are working on to provide data for each one of our directors in their areas in order to analyze student growth on a variety of measures and outcomes. One barrier that we have had this year in looking and analyzing our academic data especially and our behavioral data is with different formats and modalities of learning, some being mostly online this year, virtual, some being a hybrid model, and then some being in person for most of the year. Comparing data across districts is very difficult. So looking at that academic performance when those modes of learning may have shifted many times and having such a variety of learning modes across. So that has been a barrier for us. When we look at behavior data, behavior incident data as well as suspension, if you have kids who are on virtual, that's definitely going to affect suspension rates and some of those behavioral referral rates that we have. So we don't have as accurate of a picture this year as we may have in past years. Next slide, please. Also, you can see one milestone has been completed by this strategy team, and the other 2 are on schedule to be completed by the end of next year. The next steps that we're looking at is we do have a project team that we have deployed to look at a data dashboard. We're really looking for kind of the unicorn for us right now is that dashboard where teachers have a one-stop shop in order to access all student data, including partner district assessment data. And so we have a project team working on that right now, and really hope to maybe have a solution by next, and into the 22-23 school year. That is our goal. We're also researching different ways to document interventions. At this time, because we don't kind of have that data dashboard system, we don't really have a good way of documenting what interventions are being used and when teams change those interventions, having that documented in a systematic way that we can easily get to at the district level. At the teacher level, it's there, but we don't have that reporting up system. So we're hoping that that data dashboard might also present a solution for that. So we can really be looking at across the county some of those interventions that we're seeing that are very effective for our students. Next slide, please. Strategy 1.2 is working on post-secondary, and Casey Wisdom, our Director of Transition, is the champion for that. You can see they have some family videos that have been created for resources for communication and helping our students that have complex communication needs. Also, they're working through our strategic response solutions, which you're going to hear more about in my next presentation, documents to really look at some planning for self-determination. That's a big portion of their strategy team. Teachers, one of the barriers we have is as we're working on some self-determination pieces, teachers are inconsistently collecting that data, so we're going to problem solve around that to figure out how to strengthen that area. And so we can have systematic data collection Again, it kind of goes back to we don't have a good system for keeping that data, but we're really going to problem solve around that. Some assistance needed is really looking at where we can house some of that information so that it transfers when students transfer, be it the, progressing from elementary to middle to high, or if they're moving between districts. I'm really finding a good way to transfer some of those documents because they're not IP documents, they're more planning documents. So looking for a good way to do that. Next slide, please. They have 4 milestones that they're working on, and all 4 of those are on schedule to be completed next year. Some things that they are working on our Charting the Life Course tool, and now we have those tools in fillable format so they can be done electronically. So they're working on updating our training opportunities so that those forms will be in there. They are also working on some stakeholder interviews for their self-determination modules to continue that piece. And then also cultural proficiency. 1.3 is our safe and secure environment, and that is headed by our Director of Safety and Security, John Mueller. You can see they have done their second meeting with Homeland Security for transportation safety, and that final report will be coming soon. They've also done their environmental audits and of safety cameras as well as the schools themselves. Some barriers have been, they've had some projects to complete, such as making sure all the cameras are in place and some construction of guard shack up at North Tech, as well as putting in some cameras in the new construction in North Tech. Some of that has been delayed just because of COVID and the barriers of getting material. Next slide, please. So they have 3 milestones that they will complete by the end of the year, and they are on schedule. Some of their next steps, they did do an incident command training with district leadership team at the end of March. That has been completed, and they are in the process of completing their safety audit. 1.4 is the final strategy for Goal 1, and Adrian England is our strategy champion, and this is our family engagement strategy. As you can see, they are starting to they had a virtual family event at Litson, which was very successful, and they are planning for some family academies. Those academies are opportunities for our families to learn more about how to partner with our teachers and supporting learning in the home environment, so how we can extend learning opportunities into the home. So we're really excited about that potential. And they're also working on a home visit regulation to kind of make that more uniform across our district. They've also had some COVID barriers with training, and so they're working on developing some video training. You can see they have 3 of their milestones completed, and they have 1 more to finish up for next year, and that one is on schedule. They're going to continue with planning those family academies. They have done walkthroughs, welcoming schools walkthroughs, and the schools have created action plans, and they're in the process of giving feedback on them. And they're collaborating with PETA and communications and community partners, and that's continuing. Next slide, please. Our next goal is workforce excellence, which is championed by our Chief Human Resources Officer, Amy Schechter. And there are 2 strategies within this goal. Next slide. Dan Kelly, our Director of HR, is the champion of both of these strategies. The first being increasing retention and recruitment for all staff. So they have updated the application process and have deployed that for this upcoming school year. Career fairs are going very well. And they are developing a system of regular communication with our applicant pool to let them know kind of where they are in the process of hiring. Oftentimes, and this has been very helpful when folks are in the school and they don't hear for a while, they kind of tend to think that they're not being considered, and that may not be the what's happening. So this regular communication has really helped us kind of hang on to some of those applicants until we can get them through our process. Pandemic-related barriers. We've had some retirements and resignations, although as we look at trends in our DLT, they're not really trending higher than they have in the past. So that's good news. And our number of applicants have decreased, and they're still working on that. Next slide. So they have 4 milestones on schedule for this one. They do have their new technology system, Alio, and so they're going to begin working with that new system. And they're also working on a Qualtrics survey for retirements and resignations, as well as they'll be doing with this new technology, they'll do a 30, 60, 90-day survey of our employees to measure how supported they feel and what we might be able to do, what they feel is working well for our onboarding system, and then what suggestions they might have for us to improve that process. And they're also working on building that robust applicant pool. Next slide, please. 2.2 is also a part of HR, and we're looking at increasing that percentage of diversity among our administrators, teachers, and staff. And so a couple of things, they have a formalized advertising plan. You may have noticed there are some strategic billboards around the St. Louis area now for advertising, and then they're continuing to investigate partnerships with colleges and universities. One of the barriers is just the lack of diversity in our teacher prep program, and so still kind of trying to problem solve amongst that. Next slide, please. They have 3 on target and 1 milestone significantly delayed. The reason why that one is working with our high schools for recruitment and really trying to, especially through our Special Olympics programs, talking to high school students about being potential special education teachers. With the pandemic, we have done some of those opportunities more virtually. We haven't been able to get into the schools as readily, just because they're not allowing outsiders in. They don't want anyone extra in the school. So that has been a barrier, but we do feel like next year, as things open up a little bit more, we'll be able to get back in there and work on that specific strategy. If you look at our outcome data here, we did, Dan Kelly reported out October, January, and April, so you can kind of see where we're landing with our percentages as far as our who we're employing for white and black.
Pardon me, just a quick question. Is that employment data just teachers, or is that entire staff?
Staff, yeah, I heard six. So next steps, they are going to be working on a Qualtrics survey for subgroups to get more information on that retention and recruitment. Reaching out to high schools again to see when they might have some opportunities to get on there to speak, and then continuing with the colleges and universities, working on their job boards, targeting schools for more diverse applicants. Next slide, please. Our third goal is engagement, and our champion for that is our Executive Director of Communications, Jennifer Henry. There are 2 strategies under this goal. Next slide. The first one is collaborative relationships, and Kevin Andrew is our strategy champion here. They are finishing up cataloging their existing relationships, and we looked at that data today in our district leadership team, so they have accomplished that. And formalizing the agreement process, so they have finalized a rubric with MOUs and collaborative relationships, and they actually have taken that rubric and applied it to current MOUs. One of the barriers is getting the data. It's been a challenge, but they got it done, so that's pretty awesome. Next slide. They have 3 milestones that are on schedule for being completed as of next year. Some next steps is they're trying to streamline some of those partnership agreements. For example, BJC has several avenues of our organization, and many times there are separate MOUs for each one. We're looking at trying to streamline that, having one major MOU with different sections for each of those partnerships, just trying to streamline that a little bit. And then working on improving the ones that through the rubric showed maybe a lower rating. Next slide. 3.2 is our Voice of Customer strategy, and this is championed by Christine Singer. As you can see, they've completed an inventory of district-wide VOC activities, so kind of our surveys is where we get a lot of our voice of customer. So, and they are working on creating a calendar for that. Ensuring that they have a clear understanding of our new strategic priorities are going to help them really kind of evaluate the tools, as well as the questions on those tools that will be continued. Next slide. You can see they have one milestone completed, and the other two are on schedule to be completed by the end of the year. So right now, they're just reviewing those district-wide activities and questions, and determining which ones align with our new strategic priorities. And then gathering information on how the other CSIP strategy teams are using that voice of customer data in their decision making. Next slide, please. Our last goal is equity, and the goal champion for that is Wendy Pendergrass. And we have one strategy under that. Next slide. That strategy is really working around our focus on equity. So you can see we have the board-approved equity definition or statement, and then this was approved, our equity framework was approved in April, and then the audit of policies and regulations has been completed. They're doing just continuing guidance on the support for integrating those strategies in a systematic way throughout the district is needed. Next slide, please. You can see they have 2 milestones completed, one on target and one slightly delayed, and that was our framework. In our original plan, we had planned out that that framework would be approved in March. It did not get approved until April, but it is now completed. So some next steps, we are investigating a learning plan to build capacity for our equity work throughout the district, and then finalizing the 5-year equity. That is a review of the current status of our CSIP strategy. Any questions on that part before I move into the proposed action steps for next year? Yes.
You were talking about in the early on about needing is it a specific computer program you're looking for?
For the technology?
Right.
So we're looking for a great technology solution. The problem is we need a solution, and Doug Austin is also co-chair of that team. And right now what we've been doing is gathering the information of really what we want that data system to be able to do. So we've almost finalized the research behind it and all the things that we want that system to do so we can actually then go out and seek one.
So is it something that you think exists currently, or that you have to hire computer service to create?
We're hoping it's out there somewhere.
Okay.
That's our hope.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I have a question and a comment. The question was, when we were trying to get a one-stop data plan, our difficulties, I don't know if that's a difficulty now, was that we could do it for our students in our schools. We could not do it for students, for our students, and also the partner district students, because we didn't have access to their data.
Right.
Are we developing some type of interface that we could interact with their data? That's been the ongoing problem, it seems like, throughout the years.
And we, through our, through starting our investigations, we know that there are systems out there that if we can export data from their systems, we will be able to import it into ours. And so that's one of the pieces that we're looking at. And one of the criteria we're actually holding out there is we want to be able to, if the partner district can export this data, then we'll be able to import it into our system.
I mean, the problem, that problem is a problem I've heard for as long as I've been on the board, over 20 years. And it's, the issue is we could do this for our students in our schools. We could not do it in partner schools because we didn't. There was too many different data systems that were being utilized. Not everybody has a central one.
So, well, and there still won't be a central one, if you will. However, they may be able to export data from their system and get it to us in a secure way, and Doug probably could speak way more to that than I can. And then we would be able to upload it into our system.
No, I don't need to explain how to, you're way beyond my capability.
But, yep, that is a big piece.
I just knew what the problem was.
Yeah.
I have one suggestion.
Sure.
If we do this again, and I know we will.
Yeah.
When we talk about putting the champions on and the person there, would it be possible, without too much difficulty, and it takes too much, don't do it. Would it be possible to put a picture of the champion up there, and so that we would all know who that is? And sometimes I need to, if I could put a face to a name.
Well, actually, with our new pictorial directory, I'm sure we will have access to that.
And could we stick underneath that name, you know, contact way, either by email or by phone, so in case anybody got questions, because I'm guessing this same, well, the same line, if people had any questions, it would be nice if
They could reach out.
they had a face and a name.
I think that will be an easy addition.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, where I'd like to take you now is these are our CSIP action plans that we are proposing for the next school year. The goals and strategies do not change, just the action. So looking at student performance, next slide. For 1.1, developing processes to more effectively provide meaningful data to administrators and teams to support the decision-making progress around the effectiveness of interventions. We still want to continue our work on that because, you know, our goal eventually will be that we can have a data source bank that will tell us which interventions are most effective for different populations of our students, students with autism, students with behavior difficulties, and that sort of thing. So really want to focus in on that. And then really being able to improve our systems and processes to really implement those best practices. So if we can figure out which ones are most effective, then we can get that promoted and those things moved into our classroom. Next slide, please. For 1.2, they're going to continue the implementation plans of professional learning around self-determination in those identified districts, and then really looking at an assessment tool to integrate into that professional learning. Also develop some family perspective tools and resources for that self-determination piece as well, and then develop a process to promote equitable practices through self-determination and that long-range planning process. 1.3 with safety and security, really looking at expanding that incident command center to include not only the administrative buildings, but also into our SSD schools and garages, just to make sure that everything's prepared. And he's listed out some of the things that we would be looking at to prepare for. And then continue on the district's physical security measures. So just making sure we're continuing to improve those measures and monitor them. Next slide, please. For family and community engagement, really looking for those opportunities for families to work on those academic strategies and building their efficacy to support students' learning across settings. And then also adding on to the on-demand family engagement videos and websites to be resources for our staff and families to share data. And then implement a plan to increase the awareness and use of our quality indicators. We just recently approved the Family Engagement Quality Indicator Checklist, and so really wanting to expand the use of that. Lastly, monitoring staff and family feedback regarding our home visits. Going into Goal 2, Workforce Excellence. Really looking at continuing our work with colleges and universities, as well as using that student teacher piece as a platform to recruit full-time employment. Entering into agreements with those colleges and universities to make it easier for students to do practicums, observations, and student teaching. And then continuing to partner with them on hiring events. That implement the employee life cycle surveys, and that's what I was telling you about before, the 30, 60, 90-day surveys, as well as collect and analyze that data to then continuously improve our onboarding and support process. Next slide. For 2.2, looking at creating a progress to monitor and utilize that employee data in order to compare our percentages of staff diversity and then identify trends in that as well as opportunities for growth. Collaborate with communications and the director of equity for that targeted advertisement for diverse applicants, and then create that staff experience survey and process for really harvesting the voice of that customer data from our diverse staff, our diverse employees. With engagement, really looking at continuing to work to establish those formal agreements with our partners that meet all of those rubric requirements. Next slide. 3.2 for voice of customer, reevaluate the current activities that we're doing and the tools that we're using, and then address some of the sustainability requirements for that district-wide voice of customer data, and then just to ensure that we have that we're asking the right questions when we harvest that voice of customer data by really conducting that annual review. Next slide. For equity, next slide. We're going to continue to work on developing those professional learning opportunities for all of our staff. We'll be doing the basics of equity in understanding cultural differences, and then really looking for opportunities within our schools and classrooms for not only diversity and equity, but inclusion, and then the application of what that looks like in our classroom. Next slide. Any questions about the action steps for next year?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then I'll move to the other presentation and actual question. It's the ethic response solution.
I'm good. You can answer this, right? No, it's fine. Thank you. Thank you for that. So I'm going to present next the strategic response solutions protocol. This is a protocol that we are looking at to employ for all district-wide projects. So we have a committee that we have developed that found that recent projects that we have typically have limited impact, and we often fail to get to that implementation stage. So as we looked at this issue, where we had developed we have devoted a lot of manpower to creating and designing projects, and we couldn't get them off the ground. We really looked at what were some of the reasons why that could happen. So as we dug a little deeper, we saw there was definitely an inconsistent understanding of the project's purpose and then the approach used by leaders or among leaders across project teams. And then uncertainty as to which level of leadership could be consulted, who had the authority to really approve and hold teams accountable for that work. So it would just be kind of like, hey, I have a great idea, let's explore, let's do a project, we'll get a team together and talk about it. But there really wasn't communication at the systematic level and with leadership to get the buy-in and support needed to move those projects forward. Next slide. So the vision of this is really to develop a systematic defined process that we could then apply to all district-wide processes. And this will help us to get executive leadership sponsorship so that we know if we're going to devote time and energy to developing these projects, that they're actually going to be implemented. It also has an accountability measure where as you have that executive leadership champion, they would then have some accountability measures put in place and some checkpoints, which you'll see And then cultivate also knowledge sharing. We found a few instances where we had a project going on over here with this team and a project going on here with this team, and they kind of had the same things going on, but they weren't talking to each other. So this would ensure that we have some of that knowledge sharing. Next slide, please. So this is going to be a quick video with a quick overview. The person that's narrating the video is Carla Reichert. She is one of our research and evaluation folks. And the research and evaluation team, we have a small project team that has really worked hard to put this together. So let's just play that video. I'm going to send you the link tomorrow morning for the video. So sorry about that. All right. You'll be able to watch that at your leisure after I send you the link. Next slide. All right. So what this protocol provides is really that structured process that teams can use, and it's going to help them explore 3 different lines of evidence. So they can look at data, they can look at interviews, as well as the research, to really understand the root cause of the issue before trying to find a solution. Oftentimes, what we see is we have this great tool that we want to use, right? We have the solution, but what we really need to do is define the problem and understand the problem clearly before we can determine if that's going to be the most appropriate solution. So it does create that systematic approach that's really going to identify the issue as well as measurable objectives and goals for the team, and ultimately lead to that ultimate solution. It will have DLT guidance, district leadership team guidance and approval, and we have pre-approved checkpoints throughout the process in order to get the district leadership team's feedback moving forward with the project. And then each DLT checkpoint has discussion questions that we have created in our protocol so that we can be asking the right questions to the team to make sure that this will be a successful project once it is implemented. So making some connections. We have multiple exercises within this protocol that really require teams to really reach out to stakeholders and really research about the topic that they're exploring. It also will allow teams, if there is some cross or intersection, to work with each other and really identify those areas. The checkpoints are going to provide that opportunity for leadership to really connect and think about if they have work going on in other areas, because it will be reported out regularly in the district leadership team, so that we're reducing the possibility of a duplication of effort. The Connections newsletter will have a standing subsection devoted to different project updates as well, and we will have a site on our SSD Life where it'll have a log of activities so folks will project and what is a project that may have been completed or a discontinued project and the reason why. Next slide, please. We also the protocol utilizes the core value of continuous improvement. So it requires teams to summarize their learning upon implementation of their project, and this leads to knowledge sharing. So as other teams begin to use the process, then they can look at lessons learned, and hopefully it'll help them have an easier way. Also, the district leadership team has been prompted to really see how those insights can be incorporated into future projects. And then the SRS committee will also be doing review of the processes. So this shows some of the performance measures. And so we actually, upon creating this, took this process through the process, if you will. And so our goal was 100% of our district-wide projects will use this in the 21-22 school year. So we're going to be rolling this out in July. You can see our indicators of effectiveness. We're going to look at the percentage of district-wide projects that reach that implementation stage, as well as the percent of discontinued projects and which stage they fell in. So if a discontinued project fell in stage 1, that would be considered a success because we didn't spend a lot of time on it before we realized it was not a way we wanted to go. Also, the percent of projects receiving an implementation quality score of a 2.4 or above. So once a project's implemented, we have a rubric that will be looking at how effectively it's being implemented. And so we'd be looking for a really good score for that. And then the percentage of completed projects that receive that 2 or above on impact. So we want those projects not only to be implemented quality-wise, but to have impact on our district if we're going to spend time and money on them. And so really looking at those pieces as measurements for how effectively this process is working. Next slide. So our rollout plan, the overview has been provided, well, the overview is being provided to you this evening, and it has been provided to the district leadership team. We'll be rolling out some initial communication to staff through our newsletter. We also have our SSD live site, and actually we said it was going to go live in June, but we have it currently up and ready to go. And then we will be hosting an administrator training for all administrators, both operational and instructional, in June, one in June and one in July. And those trainings will also be recorded so folks can come back to them. It's just the overview training if they need more information or they're not able to attend those trainings. And then July 1st, all district-wide projects will be required to use this process. We will have ongoing coaching support for project teams throughout the year, and that will be by our evaluation and research team. Next slide, please. And this is just our process map that we will use and the tools that they will be using. The starred areas are areas where we will be reporting out to the district leadership team. So you can see throughout the process, there are several times where the district leadership team will receive a report on how the project is going. The blue or teal squares are also where an RFP or an RFQ might be implemented. And so we put those in there as well to indicate that that might be an opportunity where we would be soliciting those RFPs or RFQs. What questions do you have? Sure.
One, how does this dovetail into the Baldridge training that we've had everybody go through?
So this is a part of that continuous improvement model. When you look at a lot of the quality tools, they are very similar
I mean,
to.
otherwise, what we've done is we've spent a ton of time.
Nope.
A
They're
ton of effort
complementary.
and a ton of money teaching people the Baldridge.
And when you think about the root cause analysis and you think about the theory of change, they're in both models. These are just some worksheet templates to help them through the process.
The other thing, how long does it take to be trained in the SRS?
So So the overview will be 1 hour training, and then we would have coaching support for those project teams moving forward.
I would make a request that one of our work studies, since it seems to be implemented throughout, will be implemented throughout SSD. Might be nice if we all return to the state, to get an overview of what's going on. At least I make that request, and if nobody else wants to do it, that's fine, we would do it then, but I was thinking, if that's going to be the process, it might be nice to have us.
And definitely, we would have the link of the recording that you can access at any time as well. But we'd be more than happy to come to a work study. Other questions? Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
All right, we have our last, presentation for the evening, which will be, the budget presentation, our FY '22 budget, and that will be by Dr. Hall, our Chief Finance.
Good evening, Dr. Cuneo, Vice President Potroff, Board of Education, and Dr. Keenan. My name is Jeff Hogg, and I am the Chief Operating Officer for Special School District. And tonight I'll provide an update on the fiscal year 22 budget. Slide there, Doug. On the screen is a reminder of our goals and how we decided and built the budget. You'll see that staffing, curricular support, facilities and buildings, and equity were the four main goals that went into the budget development. All of those were based around supporting the success of our students and teachers. But we have some major budget assumptions. The first is an increase in real assessed value. We're still looking at a drop in personal property that should get updated throughout the summer. We're projecting to see an increase of approximately $7 million. This is a reassessment year. And so what that means is we projected 10.5% increase in real estate and a drop in personal property. We don't realize that entire 10.5% increase. The state only says you can realize it at the rate of inflation, which is 1.4%. So basically what happens is the state auditor has some worksheets that you have to fill out. You then put in last year's assessed valuation, this year's assessed valuation. It'll show you the difference, and then it'll show you what you set your tax rate at. That's when you set your tax rate. And what that ensures is that you're not in violation of the Hancock Amendment, which basically says you can only recoup taxes at the rate of inflation. And so when you hear a 10.5%, it's not a 10.5% windfall to the district. There are laws and statutes in place for that. So Department of Elementary and Secondary Education payment will remain the same. That's the guidance we're receiving from DESE. Investment earnings, again, will decrease a little bit. I know the stock market's been up quite a bit, maybe not today, but it's been up. We can't invest in stocks. We have very specific vehicles that we can invest in, and those are based on interest rates. And right now, interest rates are really low, so that interest on our money just isn't there right now. And then, again, we'll see disproportionality, and Mac Riddle will discuss that, but we'll see that at about $5 million for expenditure for partner districts again. Next slide, please, Doug. And so here's our revenue by source. You'll see in the first row, we have local. That's your current delinquent taxes. You'll see that if you look in the two right-hand columns for FY21, you'll see about $313 million. We're projecting about $321 for next year. And so that's in our local taxes. County, which is fines and forfeitures, stays relatively similar in that same area. We'll see a little increase this year, and we're projecting a little bit more of an increase next year, but you won't see a lot of fluctuation there. The state, I want to point out here, we're projecting $109 million this year. We're projecting $103 next year. And I know I just said one slide ago that the state payments would remain the same. Our foundation, our Prop C, our classroom trust, and our transportation, those are your four main ones with DESE. Those will stay the same. Where the difference is in our high needs fund, we had a little bit more come in this past year. with the high needs funding, so we believe that's going to revert back to some historic levels, which will be fine. Again, that's kind of a conservative estimate. Our federal funds will see an increase. We're projecting an increase of about $3 million. Our non-current, which is basically the sale of non-real estate property for the district, $25,000, and when you're dealing with $480 million, it's a drop in the bucket. So wherever that one ends up. And then contracted services, which is our VIC reimbursement, and our tuition, which is our adult education as well. We're going to project that as relatively flat. So you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner, we're projecting to go from $776 million to $481 million. Next slide, please. And then this is our expenditure by category. And you'll see in that first row, we have certified salaries. If you look to the right, you'll see that we're projecting to go from $188 million to $197. That's in teacher administrator salaries. And then you're looking at next year, and you'll see non-certified salaries. We're projecting a 2.2% decrease. That's not a decrease in expenditures, that's a decrease in budgeted amount. One of the things we had talked about was moving that budgeted amount closer to actual expenditures, and that's what we're going to do there. So it's not a decrease to the expenditures, it's just a decrease to the budgeted amount. And so you'll see in total salaries that we're looking to increase by 2.2%. Fringe benefits, we're looking to decrease by 5.2%. That's not to say that insurance won't go up. Again, that's just a decrease in budgeted numbers at that point. There's some discrepancy or some difference in what was budgeted and what we'll actually spend. So we're going to reduce that back to get that to be kind of an actual number there. That actually might increase just a little bit as we move into the final budget, but I'll let you know if it does. And then purchase services and supplies, we're projecting a little bit of a decrease in each one of those. And then capital outlay, you'll see an increase in that from 17.7 to 19.8. The reason for that is we're getting into a couple big projects as far as construction. And so we'll see an increase in expenditures over the next year with that. And so if you look at those bottom two lines, we projected a $496 million budget this year. We're projecting $492 million in expenditures next year. The next page, please, Doug. This kind of shows our historical revenue, which is your dark blue, our expenditures, which is the light blue, and then our budget, which is gray. And so as you can see, that historical perspective, revenues have exceeded expenditures, and expenditures have been under budget. So if you look in the last column over here, we are projecting revenue of $481 million and expenditures of $493. So we are looking to, right now we're projecting a little bit of deficit spending. And we'll do that as we bring our budget closer to actual. And so we'll take a look at that there. But again, keep in mind it's conservative revenue and a little bit higher estimate in the expenditures, just so that we know what we're looking at there. Next slide, please. Thank you. Since we're talking about expenditures, I wanted to remind you some of the additions that we're doing this year. When we started looking at adding positions, we looked at it through three different lenses. What can we do for all our districts? What can we do for some of our districts, which was the DISPRO amount, and what can we do for a few of our districts, which have the higher populations of poverty, which have the higher populations of transitional students. And so we took a look at that. We tiered them in those regards, and then we also met the requests of our schools and our districts. And we did that by special education requests, which is basically the same way that over time districts or our schools have asked for more staff. They've had to show an increase in population or opening of a new room. Then we looked at case management. We went to that 15-to-1 ratio. And then we looked at disproportionality as well and what we add to help that. And so as you can see on the screen, we have our partner district additions. We're adding 35 teachers, 3 speech and language pathologists, and 2 social workers for a total of 40 teachers. And the way that broke down is we added 12 under the regular special education request. We added 21 under that case management to get it to 15-to-1, and then we added 7 under disproportionality. Next slide, please. And then these are additions in our special school district schools. So you'll see we're adding 13.1 FTEs, and I know you're thinking, how do you add a 0.4 or a 0.5 or a 0.1? What we had is some positions that were a 0.5 or a 0.6. And so what we're looking at doing is adding those those decimals there to make them full positions. So that will make a 0.6 speech language pathologist. You add the 4, that'll be a full-time speech language pathologist. Next slide, please. And then this next slide is how are we going to support the teaching and learning that takes place in this district. So as you can see on the screen, we're adding 37.4 people to help support our teachers and our staff, our paras, our people who are teaching our students every day. We want to provide them more support, and we're doing that through these positions here. Next slide, please. And then again, one of the goals was facilities, and we want to make sure our facilities are not only kept up, but the surplus that we have in our facilities are being used all across the district. We don't want them to just sit in a room. We don't want that to build up. And so we're going to add 2 grounds crew. We're going to add 1 distribution center hauler. The grounds crew, the 2 will be paid for through a reduction in contracts. And so right now we contract out to have landscaping done, trees trimmed, fence lines cut. And so what we'll do is we'll reduce those contracts, bring them back in-house by paying 2 new people to do that job. That'll be more efficient for us as well. And so next one, Doug. And so then you'll see we're going to add 93.5 positions, and we're going to eliminate 39. We've talked about that. We've talked about where that money falls, and I guess we'll provide just a little bit more of an update next time with that before we approve the budget. This concludes my report. I'm going to pass it over to Ms. McRiddle here in a second. I will bring the budget to you on May 25th for final approval. And once Ms. McRiddle is done, I'll be more than happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Good evening, President Cuneo, Vice President Brown, Board Directors, and Superintendent King. This evening, I will be sharing information with you with regards to the work that I do with each of the partner districts on an individual level to support with disproportionality. So I'll walk you through the process that I've used with them to support with helping them to make decisions as to how they see fit to utilize these funds. Understanding the overall impact is to support partner districts with addressing significant disproportionality. Although those funds come from our district, from that 15% set aside that we'll discuss tonight, it is their responsibility, and they have the autonomy and the authority to determine what they see fit and best to support moving their district forward to address those concerns. I will also provide to our board members who have been present in the district for quite some time district profiles that will share information with you, and will help you to know what districts are identified as significant disproportionate and in what areas. And so I'll give you that information tonight. So there are about 3 of you, I think, that I have not shared that information with. You'll be able to have that information. And if there are any questions once you've referenced that, please do not hesitate to make contact with me. So significant disproportionality, IDEA, it requires states to collect and then examine data to determine if significant disproportionality occurs within school districts. They look at information based upon race, ethnicity, and states are required to really take a good look at this. And so they look at the identification of children with disabilities, but they also look at those specific impairments. They look at education settings and the amount of time their students spend within those settings. They look at incidents, duration of time, as well as types of disciplinary actions that would occur, including suspensions and expulsions. IDEA also requires states to use the standard methodology to really determine those thresholds, to take a look at that information, to talk about placement and the discipline piece, and we talked about that a little bit above, and so we'll go into the conversation a little bit more. Next slide. So when the state, and we're referencing SEA here, the state educational agency, but that is the state, and LEA would reference a school district, the local education agency. So when these two work together, they're looking to identify, again, significant disproportionality. They're looking at one or more areas, and they can be based upon the information that you have before you. Really taking a look at providing and reviewing policies and procedures and practices that exist within school districts, but also requiring those districts to reserve that set-aside amount of funds that I talked about. And so it's 15%. And in our case, it was the special school district holding those funds aside to support those partner districts. Next slide. So the rationale for using these funds for CEIS is based upon research, showing that the earlier that we can intervene and support, it's more the possibility that we'll be able to address those concerns and see improved outcomes. And so we know that the longer that a child goes without assistance, the longer it will take to provide those remediation services to help them to improve. And so these funds benefit in a general ed setting as well too, by reducing both academic as well as those social emotional concerns that exist within the general ed setting. And they can also benefit special ed by ensuring that students who are appropriately referred to special education, which would reduce referrals for special education and related services for needs that could have been addressed through that general ed process just through intervention. Next slide. And so CEIS coordinated early intervening services, they are provided to students K through 12. And as I discussed previously, the earlier that we can begin to intervene, the better off students will be. And so in this case, looking at kindergarten through third grade. The set-aside funds may be used to develop support and support multi-tiered systems of prevention and intervention. I've shared with you some activities of what can be included, such as looking at professional development to offer some scientific and research-based interventions as well as instructional strategies within classrooms from a literacy standpoint, but also looking at instruction on the use of adaptive and instructional software. So how can that be of support as well too? Providing educational and behavioral evaluation services and support, and also again including those scientific-based literacy instructional components. I've shared with you some examples to provide behavioral interventions to non-disabled students who receive a certain number of discipline office referrals within a school district, but also looking at positive behavior interventions and support. To help fund reading and or math specialists to work with non-disabled students who have not reached grade level proficiency in those subjects. And then also looking at funds for after-school tutoring programs for non-disabled students who may not score within those top 2 levels of the state assessment. Next slide. And so as I've worked with partner districts this year, and this has been new for them on an individual basis, we really were able to have some deep conversations about how they can see fit utilizing these funds within their district. And I provided them with resources, but also just that conversation to ensure that we both had a full understanding of what it could look like within those districts. And so we know that we have 11 districts that are identified. They are listed here before you. Of these 11 districts, 10 are identified in the area of discipline and 1 in the area of over-identification. And so you have the information here. We've had individual meetings. We've discussed those areas. We've talked about developing goals and how to monitor those goals, to develop those action planning components, but also ensuring that they include the use of funds. And then, again, providing the guidance and resources from state and local levels. So as we continue to learn more, sharing that information with them as well, too. And so districts have been asked to develop those plans for the upcoming school year so that we can begin to plan ahead and not behind. And we want to have that information by the end of May so that we can continue to work with our finance department to ensure that we are allocating those funds to districts as we have expressed, but also to continue to monitor those funds throughout the school year moving forward. Next slide. So here's an example of
how we plan with those partner districts again, looking at that reason, sharing the goal, developing the goal, might I say, and then activities. And so this is an example of one of our partner districts and a previous plan for this current school year. And I just wanted to share that with you so that you could see the type of conversations that are being had and will continue to take place in the upcoming school years as we continue to address this proportionality. I have provided resources from both the state as well as the federal level to our partner districts to support them when we are not present and available for them, so that they are able to reference and have those conversations with other members of their school district, which would include administration and other stakeholders. Next slide. And that is the end of my presentation. And at this time, if there are any questions for Dr. Hope or myself, we will receive them.
I have a question about, you didn't mention it, but since we started the zero-based budgeting, how is that had a nice positive effect on being able to budget more accurately in the future, for future years? Or how we have that?
With implementing it this past year, we did a really good job. We taught the schools, principals, and directors how to do that. And so that will only help moving forward, because we actually will look at what the schools really need, what the partner districts really need, and then we'll be able to put that in. That will eliminate some of the extra budgeting that is in there. And so while it may have a little effect this year, because we're still doing that, it'll really take shape in the years to come when you start to look at supplies and purchase services.
What with the stimulus funds? Where are they? Did those go into the federal funds, or?
Those go into the general funds from the state. And so
Okay, so those are part of our state funds?
those are in, yes, those are in the ESSER funds that come into the state money, but they're not with our DESI payment, they're not with transportation, they're set aside. And so we've received approximately $2 million in funds already. We've expended 2.2 with PPE, with cleaning, and extra technology supplies to support the virtual.
I have a question. What if you have a group that are underdiagnosed? Is that considered proportionality? No, it has to be overdiagnosed, huh?
And the threshold for the state is 3.5%.
No, because I can think of some of our northern schools, it is rare that an individual is diagnosed with a diagnosis of autism, after they ended up with a diagnosis of intellectual disability. It just seems strange to me that it would be dependent on where you live, and what the diagnosis is.
That was going to be sort of I've shared these concerns before, so I guess I'll repeat them. But I didn't realize, I don't think I'd actually seen this goal, and I realized this was meant to be as an example, so this may be something we should talk about at a future board meeting in more detail, but I have a concern about a goal that just says we should reduce the percentage of kids that we find, because my worry there is that turns into really just, let's not identify the kids. So my question was, actually, is this a psychometric issue, meaning are the tools we're using to identify these kids calibrated for a different socioeconomic group or age, and that's why we're over-identifying these kids? Are there more kids in these districts with intellectual disabilities? And is it just intellectual disabilities as opposed to autism? That might be a public health issue, right? I mean, there's issues with toxic waste in North County. So these are things, I mean, I'm putting on my public health hat here, but this is something I worry about. And so I want to be careful that as we're trying to just reduce the percentages of the kids that we're identifying, that we're not missing the bigger picture of maybe why this is happening. And so I hope, again, I understand one of the goals is to review the initial evaluations to ensure they're compliant. But, if it seems like the data is accurate. We say, boy, we think we are identifying these kids. They do seem to have more intellectual disabilities. It seems like there's a higher proportion in these counties. I think that sounds to me like a public health concern and something that we.
Absolutely. And to speak to that, the districts do have the autonomy to develop their goals of what they see fit, but at the same time, the state does require them, and the state does at the same time take a look at their policies and their procedures and practices to ensure that in instances like you're speaking of, that they are addressed. That comes from the state level, and those are conversations directly with the partner districts.
My question is, regarding the intervention services, I see that you say that we are dealing, or preparing, to deal with non-disabled kids in reference to reading proficiency. Could you expound on that as to how, what we may be discussing as to how we're going to do that?
Absolutely. So one of the resources that I provide to them in the conversation that we've had is to talk about those allowable expenditures of what they can do, those expenses, which could include when you're looking at interventions. So it could be considering an interventionist to work within the district to support with the care team process, and that's when you identify students through your data teams process, when you're looking at those data points to determine where students are struggling and how to support them, or even simply within the classroom, and classrooms having those classroom teachers having those conversations as teams to talk about where they see students struggling. And so the example that I'm using is that an intervention is being of support for those students who may be on the cusp of being identified to receive special education services. But at the same time, those services are to support the entire school population, specifically those that are within the GNF population, but at the same time supporting the overall school community, if that makes sense. So an interventionist could be a support, looking at additional classroom teachers to support in those areas, looking at paraprofessionals, looking at interventions and programs after school, looking at tutoring, as we've talked about, looking at even programs within the school day. So there are so many things that they could definitely take a look at. Looking at it from a discipline standpoint, how do you want to address that? Is there a need to look at having an additional instructional coach to support with helping teachers and helping the school staff in general to understand those practices that relates to the academic and or the social emotional component? So there are several ways that they can take a look at it through their brainstorming piece and looking at what's allowable to be considered allowable with those funds.
Well, I know that I have made mention, Dr. Cuneo, that I had engaged the Hazelwood School District first, and I reached out to Dr. Davis as well as Dr. McCoy. And are you acquainted with, well, if you're not, a couple of years ago, MSBA had a special guest speaker. His name was Danielle Dickey. And I contacted him after that particular engagement. And even now, we're back in, now that COVID is over, back into possibly bringing him here to assist, because that particular need is a great one. And in talking to the various superintendents, my thoughts were that, and I'm told that there are some ESS money, ESS, I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Might be the CEIS
Or ESSER, ESS, EOR.
That each school has these funds, and that we'll probably get back on to seeing about him coming. He has a particular reading program that he put together. And this is what Dr. Cuneo and I talked in reference to the politics of it, was that being the keynote speaker at the Missouri School Board Association convention, that portion of it apparently was identified. And so to that point, I'm wondering if these particular
There are some districts within the county who have looked at having other consultants and professional development facilitators to come in and to lead those conversations within their district, focusing on many topics, whether it's from a social emotional standpoint, from even an equity standpoint, or understanding the academic piece. And so those are all considered allowable expenses with utilizing these. And so we have had those conversations directly with each of the liaisons within the partner districts. And what we've asked for them to do is to have those conversations further with their leadership teams, including the school level leadership teams, to ensure that they all are on the same page with how they see fit to utilize those funds within their district.
Experience with this. I just want to understand, in the districts you listed for us, the 11 districts, is it your role, or does somebody have the role in sharing what one district does with another district? Is there an exchange of knowledge in terms of their plan?
Districts throughout the county, they often work in collaboration together, just as we work with them in partnership, so they have the autonomy to make those decisions and to work collectively together.
And then, obviously, the point of the disproportionality fund is to address the number on it, or the rate, the identification of the students. But the goal is to move a district out of that range, right? Where they don't fall into this group that are, that the number isn't what we want it to be. So let's say we give some of the funds to District A, and they put a plan in place for a year. And then we obviously, I think, assess them the following year to see how they did. If that number doesn't improve, what happens next?
So we don't necessarily assess, we work in collaboration, because again, it depends on, our structure is a little bit different. Had we not been special school district and we were, and those special education services were provided within that district, then that district would have to set aside 15% of their funds to address it. But because we are the special education service provider for the county, we have those funds, and it's our responsibility to ensure that we disperse those funds to districts. In most instances, this is not necessarily only addressing the special education component. This is more so looking at the overall school population. So with that being said, districts, they can make those decisions. We can't say that we're not going to give them that money, but what we will continue to do is work with them in collaboration to ensure that they are working to see that progress with them.
And that's the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. They make the determination. So they do the calculation, and then they'll determine each one of those 11 districts. And then the other 11 districts that are not identified, some of them could be identified based on patterns and trends that are happening within their district. So DESE is the one that determines if they continue to be in this status to receive these funds to support changing some of those identifiers and their outcomes.
I don't want to sound cynical, but there's something that's just inherently wrong with this model. In other words, if a district has disproportionality, in other words, let's say they have an overabundance of suspension in an area. They get a certain amount of money from our budget, correct? We have no control over where that money goes,
No, it's a,
and we don't then get to monitor if it's effective. But if it's not effective, we have to pay for it again next year, and they could still do the same thing and not be effective. Doesn't this sound kind of goofy to you?
Well, I do know that they will, in those situations, when that occurs, the state will continue to monitor, as Dr. Keenan has expressed, and there could be sanctions from the state level, but not from special school districts.
Why couldn't we cut off the money? That's a pretty
part of it is to give them the money. You can't cut them off because that's.
But we have no control over what they do is effective.
Well, I guess this,
It just doesn't seem right to me.
well, we are erring on the side of that districts are really wanting to make sure that they're improving. And so that districts, we're there to partner with them to help them figure out, because the better they do with the special ed population and their gen ed population, et cetera, the better they will do for all of their students in their district. So, this has been disproportionality I've noticed in the last at least 10 years, that this has been something that, has been, it's through the federal government. The federal government requires this for each state to come up with a plan. The state is monitored by the federal government. These are federal dollars that are coming through to the state, and then the state disperses them to the districts based on the federal allocation. So there is a requirement for us in every district who is identified to be utilizing this special ed service.
It just seems that they should report also. That there should be some tie-in to their effectiveness on what they do with the money. Because if they're ineffective, they get paid again.
Yeah, they are going to continue to get those funds. However, it's not a substantial amount of funds. In some cases, you know, it's like $40,000. So they can do some of that, but some of them it's a substantial amount based on the number of students in the district. So, we can't violate their federal guidelines. We have to make sure we're following those and that we're appropriating the funds appropriately to these districts based on what the federal guidelines are mandating that we have to do.
I have a couple other questions. In looking at the information you gave us here, I noticed it says that in reference to the partnership district, the Hazelwood is a coalition district.
That's for, early childhood special education.
Okay, and so explain that to me. So we don't service special education for.
Correct. They provide, their own special education services, as, our director, Stacy Sturdivant, shared in her presentation about a month or less ago. She talked about the difference.
The other thing I'm noticing here in reference to the disproportionality says, that district has identified as a district with disproportionality, but has been identified as a contributor.
Based upon discipline for their district. So the number.
Then I look at Jennings and it says that with IEPs and are black for greater than 10 days.
Right. So that means that those students have been suspended, at a higher rate, and they've been out of school with a 10-day suspension of or more, 10 days or more. And so those, again, are the practices within those school districts that we don't necessarily have control over. But again, as Dr. Keenan and myself has expressed, the federal government, IDEA, requires us to set aside these funds, and because we are the special education provider, those funds are within our organization, and we have to ensure that they are dispersed to those partner districts.
And one final question, is Mr. McWhirter, as of today, still the director for Hazelwood?
Yes.
So we'll continue to work through this process with all of our school districts. And I think that the one thing I would say is that the districts are getting stronger at understanding how to be able to support their students by utilizing these, this strong willingness to improve in these areas.
And this was the first year where we've had those intimate conversations. The first conversation took place with zero-based budgeting. And then we went further when we saw, based upon the practices that were in place from previous years, that a lot of activity was not taking place, and I wanted to ensure that there was another layer of support for those districts to help them to understand disproportionality and how to utilize those funds, and they have been very appreciative of those conversations, and they are working with their teams now to ensure that they do see their progress, because they do understand that there's definitely a need once
would ask everybody to take like 5 minutes, stretch out your legs, and then enjoy it.
Oh, I already made a motion to adjourn.
All in favor? Aye. All opposed? How about if we take 5 minutes?